Okay, so today starts lesson one. Now, first you need to know a little bit differently about PTSD. Post means after. Trauma is Greek for wound. So after wound, and instead of thinking about the S as stress, think about it as survivor. Because you were wounded by something that happened to you, but you survived it. You're not a victim of it. And as a survivor, instead of thinking of the D as disorder, think of it in a different way. You define where you go from here. And the only way to move on from here is to figure out what it is. Now, I'm a 10-time survivor. And while I know all the symptoms of PTSD because I had them all, they pretty much subsided before the 30 days was over. So if you're new to your experience, 30 days, if the symptoms haven't subsided, then you need to go get professional help. If it's after 30 days, then you can still change where you go from here. You can still define what your life becomes. Now, the best example of this is one time I was on a highway in Massachusetts coming home from work, and I'm in the passing lane. It's rush hour traffic. I get hit in the rear end, and the car went into a spin, and his head first into the guardrail. Well, I covered my face. For whatever reason, all I could think about was my mom was going to be very upset if she couldn't have an open casket. I know, irrational thinking, but anyway. When the car was done spinning around after it crashed into the guardrail, I started laughing, and I couldn't stop. I got out, checked on the other car, made sure everybody was okay, everybody was fine, and the kid said, I try to get in between you and the guardrail because my brakes are bad. Normally that would have pissed me off, but I was in shock, and all I could do was laugh. So I get back to the car, and I pushed it from the passing lane into the breakdown lane. Now this is in rush hour traffic, and I'm still laughing. A state trooper saw it happen, and he said he clocked it hitting at 75. That's how fast that spin went. So he called for an ambulance to make sure I was okay. And the ambulance took me to the hospital, and I'm laughing the whole way. I get to the hospital, and I get all checked out and everything, and turned out I have friction burns all over me and a bunch of bruises and sprains and strains and everything else. But I was okay. So the nurse hands me the phone. I call my mother. We didn't have cell phones back then. And my mom thought I was playing a practical joke on her, so I had to get the nurse to explain to her I was telling the truth. I couldn't tell her what hospital I was in. I couldn't tell her what city I was in. I couldn't tell her anything because the stress just really made my mind go, whew. So the nurse gets on the phone, tells her where I am and that I was okay, but they needed to come and get me. And I heard my mother go, oh my God, is she okay? Is she okay? And the nurse says, yeah, she's fine, but, she's going to have to get checked out again. So I get on the phone, and she says, what the hell did you do to my car? So anyway, I waited, and my parents came, and my dad found out where the car was, and he drove so that we could go look at the car. He said, I want you to look at the car. So I walked around the whole car, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I survive this accident? And then he goes, I want you to remember something. You survived this accident. And he handed me the keys to his car. Yes, I'm not driving back on that highway again. He said, oh, yes, you are. you're going to drive right now. Because if you don't take over that wheel now, you'll never take it over again. So I got in the car, and I got my parents in the car, and he's got this big old Grand Marquis. And I drove home. And the whole way home, I was in the slow lane. I'm watching in the rearview mirror to make sure nobody's coming too close to me again. And I took it slow. And I was afraid, but I kept going. And I drove home. And the next day, we were around so we could start taking care of all the insurance stuff and the accident reports and everything else. And then we looked for another car, and then I had to buy a car because my mom wasn't going to let me use her car again. But that's how you do this. You get behind that wheel and you take back control of where you go from here as a survivor. So from today on, we're going to be learning about how to do this, because you define where you go. You determine where you go from here. So let's start with looking at this as you're not a victim. You're a survivor. Take that attitude and let's drive with it. See you next time.